I'm really grateful to you for coming. I'm also grateful to you for supporting Victoria Hall. Thanks to these 2 public meetings, we'll have paid to fix their lifts, so it's good to be able to do something at the same time as holding our meeting. So as I said in the lead up to this, my goal is to try and explain, as much as I can understand it, what the government's thinking is, where we are, what our options are, the stakeholders, and then most importantly, for me to hear your views. So last time it took about half an hour to go through everything. I'm really sorry, but it is complex and it is changing by the day. But hopefully you'll leave here and go, right, I think I get what's going on now, and then you can make decisions for yourselves. But I will continue to listen and see where we're going. So in terms of what I'm going to try and cover this evening, so what is the government proposing? Right, I've done that. Why and timeline, benefits, concerns, decision makers, future of Rutland, do we have a choice? What next, and your thoughts. So turning straight to what is the government proposing. So these are the biggest reforms in 50 years that has been done by government to local councils. And it matters because, as all of you know, although I'd like to pretend that when you vote for me it's the most important vote that you do, actually local councils are the thing you have the most contact with on a day-to-day basis as members of our community. So as you've probably sussed by now, government wants to scrap, do please come on in, grab seats. Government wants to just move away from 2-tier governance, and so they want to scrap all district councils, so Harbour District Council, Melton Borough Council, South East Stephen District Council, but they've also said we're going to scrap small unitaries like Rutland. In their place, they want to create these enormous unitary councils which serve a minimum of 500,000 people. So if you compare that to Rutland, we're currently serving 41,000 people in the Bell County Council. South East Stephen has 145,000 residents, and Melton has 52,000 residents. So we are looking at substantial changes. Now originally, their quote as to why they were doing this was that they wanted to facilitate a move away from 2-tier, because that's their policy, they think it's better. But also, they were going to where unitary councils, where there is evidence of failure, or where their size or boundaries hinder their ability to serve services for their residents. So we don't come into the failure in terms of evidence of failure, because we're financially sound, and actually, as you may have seen in the Sunday Telegraph yesterday, we're the #1 rated council in the entire country for social care, which is actually one of the reasons given for doing this review, is that social care is so hard to do, they're paying for small councils. However, once the new large unitary is in place, that's not the end of the reorganisation. They want them to move to what they call mayoralties and strategic authorities. So that's what we've seen in Teesside, in West Midlands, Manchester, those I say are the successful models that we've seen. But it's also taken place in Cambridge and Peterborough, in Yorkshire, in West of England and other places. And these combined authorities have enormous amounts of power, especially in planning. So essentially you scrap the districts, you scrap small unitaries, but you create a new level of governance above it, which the mayoralties with strategic authorities. So, what does the government say are the benefits of this? So as I touched on, the government's ultimate goal is not the local government reorganisation, it's the mayoralties. They want to deal with 10 big mayoralties across the entire country, rather than lots of county councils. And local government reorganisation, of course, is a stepping stone to get them where they want to. So they set out the benefits of devolution as everything from the transfer of powers and funding from national to local government. They say decisions will be made closer to home, but that depends on your perspective. Yes, Whitehall, Parliament will have fewer decisions to make, so it will move to our local region, but it's a regional decision, not a Rutland decision. So, for example, Leicester and Rutland could come together Leicestershire and Rutland could come together into a new strategic authority, or you could see an East Midlands authority. We just don't know where it may end up. It is true, by and large, that councils of all size and political affiliations want to see devolution. Obviously, the Conservative government wants to see devolution as well, hence why we now have the West Midlands mayoralty, the Manchester mayoralty. But we said you didn't have to do local re-government organisation in order to have a mayoralty, we just created it as an additional tier. So areas you want devolution have to put forward proposals, but there is quite a lot of disagreement about what that looks like. But strategic authorities themselves look after transport and local infrastructure, skills and employment, housing and strategic planning, economic development and regeneration, environment and climate change, health, well-being and all public service reform. So all of those will move from what would currently be either Rutland County Council or under a new model, a Leicestershire potential model we were in, to the mayoralty. So you're looking at a big shift in terms of how close those are to you. But it will be much easier for government to allocate money, and they'll be able to allocate it at the regional level. Decision making will move away from government, and it makes it simpler, as I said, for government. So in the long term, at first, lots of competencies that currently sit at Rutland will move to Leicestershire probably, but then they would move to that kind of metro there, whereas again, we've had real successes, Andy Burnham, Andy Street, we've also seen some that haven't really. So as I say, devolution is the priority. They also say that as well as decision making, the process would be really beneficial because it creates simple structures, speaks for itself, everything runs through Mayoralty. It will massively enable housing on a vast scale. So the Minister said only a few weeks ago, this agenda is about tackling exactly that being housing. Because obviously they've got plans for 1.5 million houses, and this is what areas like Harbour that I represent are so worried they might be absorbed into the city and essentially be forced to build all the city's housing, which we've already seen. They also argue there'll be significant cost savings. So on the face of it, yes, fewer CEOs, fewer senior management teams, less duplication, but of course we're actually then creating a Mayoralty level, which will have to have these exact same things. So when asked, ministers always quote this 2020 PwC report that says that if you move to 25 two-tier areas to a single unitary, you will have a one-off saving of £400 million. But when I asked the Library and Parliament the evidence that saves money, they said there is no evidence at the moment that it will save money. And again, we'll have the Mayoralty level, so we don't have the cost of what it would be to bring in those. So where are we currently in the timeline? So it's all moving incredibly quickly. So before Christmas, all the councils were written to that were big, so Leicestershire, Rutland got written to because we're next to a big unitary, and essentially they don't want orphan unitaries, that's what they call us at the moment, we're orphans, because we're small and on our own. Some people like me. But anyway, and essentially you got told before Christmas you had to write by the 10th of January with whether or not you want to postpone elections in your area, not really relevant to Rutland, but it is in Lincolnshire and it is in Leicestershire, and which pathway you wanted. So how quickly do you want to move down this model? This week we were meant to receive, so last Thursday, we were meant to receive the news about whether they were going to postpone the elections in those areas, which essentially tells us which areas they're going to prioritise. That didn't happen. I was told this morning by the Labour Whip's office, because I actually have quite a good relationship with them, that we will find out on Thursday at the latest now, but so essentially any day this week we will find out who's had their elections cancelled. So the government wants interim plans by March 2025, so we're not looking at very far away. So by March there need to be interim proposals put in place. Then by May, if you're on a quicker fast stream, you need to put in full proposals. And if you're on a slightly slower one, you're allowed to put them in by autumn. And essentially that is the pathway 1 or pathway 2. They want all of this done with 185 councils into new unitary structures by April 2028. So we're looking at incredibly fast moves. In terms of who are the decision makers, so the final decision on any restructure sits with Angela Rayner as Secretary of State. The restructure does not require the affected councils to give consent. So they have put in place legislation, or they've said they will put in place legislation that if there are councils who hold up, delay or prevent reorganisation, they will be able to override the views of that council. As we saw from the timeline, there are no plans for consultation with the public so far, let alone referendums, which we've seen in the past. There is no mechanism for you, as an average person, or for me as an MP, to oppose or to disagree. I wrote a written question to the Minister 2 weeks ago, I got a response over the weekend, where I said, will you provide funding so that councils can hold referendums? Or will you provide funding so they can hold public consultations? And their answer was, it is for councils to decide how to best to engage locally, including residents, in a meaningful and constructive way when developing their proposals. So they're not going to provide any funding, and they're not going to hold any consultations. We were told a few weeks ago that there would be a consultation at the very end of the process on whether we were to join a Mayoralty or not, but there won't be anything with the reorganisation at all. So it's not us making decisions, but Rutland County Council does have a voice and a say. So what does it mean for Rutland? We know the government wants to scrap small unitaries. We know they're expecting it to be 500,000 people per unitary. However, they've done a deal with the Treasury where now a unitary can go to 380,000 if you can reach local agreement. And then above it, it's likely we'll get unitary combined Mayoralty authority. So what has our council said so far? I only got access to this letter today, so I've just been going through it this afternoon, and I will go into it a bit. I know you can't read that at the moment, so don't worry. But essentially, Leicestershire County Council and Rutland County Council wrote jointly with the Mayor of Leicester, Peter Salisbury, on the 10th of January, and I have some fundamental issues with the letter, but essentially the letter says that it is recognised by all stakeholders that this is an opportunity for us. I would question who those stakeholders are. It says there has been initial consideration and engagement. I would ask with whom that engagement is taking place. It says there is unanimous agreement that we need a mayor. I, for one, do not consent unanimously to that. It says that we recognise that local government reform is needed. I don't know why we're saying we absolutely recognise it's needed, because we haven't had that discussion with our communities, and it wasn't needed under Conservative government, so why are we saying it is now? It then says we are an area in need of reorganisation, but again there is a consensus, and it also says we are in agreement that the city boundaries have to change, that Leicester can expand into Leicestershire. Again, there is significant upset, not least amongst MPs, but amongst all district councils who, a few days after this letter, although they hadn't seen it, were told what was in it, and they all wrote united with Rutland County Council, slightly strangely, to say they were not in agreement with the boundaries of Leicester expanding. What the letter did was it requested for elections to be suspended in Leicestershire to allow us to be on pathway 2, which is one of the fastest models towards moving towards this model. It moves us towards a mayoralty, it moves us towards reorganisation, and I say it puts us on a quicker model where we have to have proposals in by May, rather than, for example, having autumn or later. So in terms of what the options are for us, we have lots of neighbours, but we actually have very few choices because of the way the government has structured this. So obviously we have Lincolnshire next door, they've already got a devolution deal. The election for their mayor is taking place in May. However, I've already had a letter from the government saying we're going to give the mayor 18 months, because I represent Lincolnshire as well, and in 18 months we may change the Lincolnshire mayor to being the Greater Humber mayor. The reason for that shows you the general direction of travel. They're not interested in Lincolnshire, they're definitely not interested in the south of Lincolnshire that I represent. They're interested in the Scunthorpes and the Grimsbys and that kind of industrial heartland. And this is one of my main worries I'll get to later, is that a lot of this is very city-centric driven or industrial driven. We all know we're not industrial in the kind of typical way that many people think of. We have our own forms of industry. So Lincolnshire is out technically as a partner for us. Cambridgeshire and Peterborough are pursuing their own plans. Northamptonshire isn't even up for discussion because they're looking at all sorts of complicated splits and proposals. And then that leaves us with Leicestershire. Now obviously we previously subsumed into Leicestershire. The government added an additional requirement in the documents that came out in December that we weren't expecting, which was that you have to co-locate, or they expect you to co-locate, with where you already share services, for example, police and fire. And obviously we are part of the Leicestershire and Rutland Police and Leicestershire and Rutland Fire. So that suggests that we would do, that we would automatically move with Leicestershire, essentially they've limited our options. What I would say, and there's been some real disinformation about this out in the community, currently there is no model where we are subsumed by Leicester directly. That is not currently on the table. Of course, with a mayoralty, that could happen, but in terms of our direct unitary authority, that is not currently on the table. Yes, a strategic authority possibly, but not yet. So let's look at Leicestershire and Leicester. So the model that Leicestershire County Council wants is one unitary for the whole of Leicestershire and Rutland. So I haven't, so essentially that gives you an idea of essentially one giant one for all of us. So Leicester City would have its own unitary authority, and then the county plus Rutland would come together as a second. Now the population for Leicestershire County Council is 712,000, and there are 53 wards and councils for Leicestershire County Council. That works out as 13,500 people per ward. So in this basis, if we went into what I'm calling the donut, someone suggested I call it the polo, but I think it's a bit of a dumb idea, so I'm going to stick with donut. Essentially, we would have 3 councillors representing Rutland at the new unitary authority. So from 27 down to 3, against obviously all the others who would also have their own voice. Within that, the borders of Leicester would change, which obviously we can't currently see here, but they would not expand as far as Rutland. That is not on the table and it is not up for discussion. Not just because I don't want it to be, but it genuinely isn't. Although Leicestershire County Council wants this model, the districts have obviously opposed it, so they do not support it and do not think it's right. The second model is moving to 3 unitaries. So there's division here about whether we should go into north-south or east-west. So if I look at east-west first, this is the model that it would likely look like, but the district councils will put a load of money to one side to try and work out what would be best for them, because the government hasn't given any money, but they've taken on road consultants. East-west works. If you work on that new 380,000 minimum, we can have 2 unitaries within the Shire with Rutland as well. If we look at north-south, I know I've thrown extra colour in here, it is likely we would end up in the north. The reason being that Melton Borough Council has said they will not agree to not being with us. Their view, so their view is that Melton and Rutland are the most kind of agreed in terms of way of life, functioning, way we look at each other, way we live our lives around it. So although I put Rutland in red there, because technically we could move either south or north in terms of populations, I think, Melton has been very clear that they want us. And also I have been told that there's various other benefits that there are for us, but I'm waiting for data. So in this model, we would get 6 councillors in our unitary authority, which is obviously double what we would get otherwise. I'll go into those more later. The next one is obviously the status quo. We could refuse, we could challenge, we could fight, we could hold a local referendum, and we could say, no, we want the status quo, we want our county council. And then the final was that we could put forward an alternative proposal. Now, as I said, in Lincolnshire, they've agreed a mayor is coming, the elections are in May. However, Lincolnshire County Council has asked also to be part of the reorganisation, so they're likely to move into 2 unitaries as well within Lincolnshire for the first time they've been split up. So one from the city of Lincoln all the way south, and then they'll all move to the north. Now, could we do our own proposal? I've been trying to do maths. There was a lot, when I knocked my doors with the election, and I've never raised it proactively or publicly because it's not for me to do, it's for the community to drive and then for me to support. I was shocked at how many doors in Stamford and the Stamford villages, not the very top of my constituency, which is right near Grantham, but the very south, they were saying, we want to join Rutland. We don't want your council tax, but we want to part of Rutland. And obviously my answer to the door was, the more of you that join Rutland, the lower our council tax can be. And essentially, I was really surprised at the appetite and how high it is. And the leader of South East Stephen, who's an independent, he said that he's very, very interested in essentially a rural authority. I have no idea what we would call it. I can't go down that route, it's too complicated at the moment. But potentially bring together South East Stephen, Rutland and Melton and the Vale, and us forming our own rural unitary. That would expand all the way into Grantham, however, all of Bourne, all of Market Deeping, and all of Stamford and all the areas that I represent. The challenge here is that when I've done the maths, we are still 100,000 people short. Now, of course, it doesn't take into account the fact that Melton's about to massively grow in size. I've lived the bypass, that brought in thousands of homes. However, we would still be short. However, it doesn't mean you shouldn't put forward what you actually think is best for your communities, and it doesn't mean you can potentially argue back against the arguments for 380,000. As I say, we would still be expanding. It's about similar way of life, rural way of life, and our outlook. So, if the plans go ahead, where we would be absorbed into Leicestershire, could we still call ourselves Rutland? So this is a very different conversation to whether or not we want to keep our unitary authority. It's about what we call ourselves and who we are. According to the government, ceremonial counties technically exist as counties solely for the purposes of having a Lord Lieutenant. Who knew? And we are joined by her this evening. Ceremonial counties have Lord Lieutenants and High Sheriffs, who's also here with us, I saw you earlier, representing our area. Now, we have records going all the way back to 1559 of us having Lord Lieutenants. Of course, apart from the short bit we lost our freedom last time. From a government perspective, ceremonial counties defined what's called the Lieutenancies Act of 1997. Now, we know we lost our lieutenant last time, and that's when we lost our independence, but the position was obviously recreated in 1997. There are currently no examples in the whole country of multiple ceremonial counties existing under one local government. So that would reflect the fact that ceremonial counties tend to be bigger than their local government areas. So I wrote to government and I said, well, what are you doing? And we have something called a written question. So I can submit a question onto this platform, and when the government responds in writing, it's actually laid formally in Parliament. So it's as if the minister spoke from the dispatch box, they have to be completely accurate about what they say. And I said, you said, what consideration have you given to protecting ceremonial status to make sure people don't lose it if you're going to force this review? As you can probably read, I'm not going to do that annoying thing where people read what's on the screen unless anyone puts their hand up and says they can't read the quote. Fabulous. They couldn't give me a clear answer. So my conclusion is either they haven't thought about it, or they won't promise to protect it. I don't know which one it is. So obviously, if they're saying there's no direct impact, but we will work with you if there is, I thought I'd better look at the legalities of it all. So I looked at the basis in legislation for our ceremonial status, which has been really quite painful. But essentially, the division of England into ceremonial counties took place in the Tenancies Act of 1997. This was passed before we returned to being a unitary authority. So we are not listed on the face of the bill, as we parliamentarians would say. So essentially, Rutland is not listed in the document that says here's a list of all the ceremonial counties in England, which obviously means we have a lot less protection than all the others who are listed. And the reason that we have less protection is that governments hate reopening old pieces of legislation, because if you open something, anyone can amend it to say anything they want, people like me, who would be trying to amend it to say that Rutland should be protected. However, some experts I've spoken to said to me that Section 3B, bear with me, states that a Lord Lieutenant Act extends to any other area in England which are counties for purposes of the Local Government Act 1972. So we were in the Local Government Act of 1972, we weren't. So the counties for purposes of the Local Government Act 1972 were covered, but that is the act that turned us into a district of Leicestershire. So we can't even rely on the 1972 Act because it's the one that actually trapped us. So that assessment leaves us with the fact that we cannot exist as a county. So then I went into what happened last time this was discussed in Parliament, because obviously Rutland last time round, newspapers around the world were talking about Rutland losing its independence last time. I've seen coverage from Zimbabwe, from Kenya, from places in Asia, China, you name it, talking about this small county that's fighting for its independence. So last time they discussed this in Parliament, the Labour Minister, who was Labour then as well, said that in their opinion there was no legal basis for a historic or ceremonial county unless it's concurrent with a local authority existing parallel to it. Therefore, if Rutland County Council is abolished as a local government area, our Lord Lieutenancy is abolished, and therefore we are no longer a ceremonial county. And this is probably why the government couldn't give me assurances, because it's not that straightforward. So how do we protect our ceremonial status as for Rutland? For me, this is a bit of a red line. I don't think it should restrict our identity, but I am open to having that discussion, which is why we're here. So I tried to look through how could I save our ceremonial status. The first is obviously existing legislation. As I mentioned, government hate opening it, but that doesn't mean we couldn't do it. Ultimately, this is all in the hands of government, and if they want to help us by reopening all legislation, they can choose to do so, particularly their majority, because if they decide they want to back it, they can just say to their MPs, you are voting for this, and we'll be through. Option 2, if the government passes legislation to force us to merge, because we refuse to join Leicestershir, I could lay an amendment to that legislation that says you must, however, protect our ceremonial status. Now, hopefully, government would agree to that, but if they don't, then essentially I would need to go around Parliament and beg borrow and steal votes from every single other party and beg people to vote with me and support me on it. And I would do my best to get that across the line. The third option is going back to the Tenancy Act. There is a sentence in the 1997 Act that says, Her Majesty may appoint lieutenants, or in addition to Lord Lieutenants, for any county or area. Area being obviously the bit I'm interested in. So could we ask the King to appoint lieutenants for Rutland? There's a few comments to that. One, what is a lieutenant versus a Lord Lieutenant? They are clearly fundamentally different. I haven't found a legal expert yet that can explain the difference, but legislation is done carefully for a reason. 2, this may not, because it's a lieutenant, not a Lord Lieutenant, confirm the status of our county. And thirdly, the King acts according to the advice of his ministers of the day. So again, we'd be asking the King to essentially say, I'm going to break a lot of rules for Rutland. But then in that horseshoes we have, maybe that's the kind of thing we should be considering. So these are the options so far that I've identified. If any of you have any routes I haven't thought of, or if any of you are geniuses in legislation, please come forward and tell me. I have to say a big thank you to Sarah Furness. She's been speaking to the palace while I've been speaking to politicians, and we're legal experts, and we're trying to merge together our understanding to get to the bottom of it. So, in terms of our options, just to remind you, we can, at the moment, it looks like join Leicestershire in one big giant donut, or we can join the Leicestershire local, where again I'd have to fight to make sure that Rutland's in the name of whatever unitary we join, so we don't just join Leicestershire, we join in East Leicestershire and Rutland, or whatever the name might be. We can have the status quo, or we can put forward an alternative. In terms of my concerns or proposals, we've covered the loss of ceremonial county in detail, so I won't go over that again. The next, as I say, is the process and speed. This isn't a choice, it's currently being imposed on us. Leicestershire County Council and RCC were committed to put in that initial letter that I covered earlier, but the districts and the boroughs, let alone MPs or any of us, have not been given a chance to have our say. The current information sat with government, in terms of how Rutland is seen, is that we want a mayoralty, we support reorganisation, and we accept city expanding its borders. I'm not sure that's the consensus of our communities. The speed at which government is moving is not producing that space for public discussion, and it's not even giving councils the ability to really do the work, to get the data and evidence they need to work out what's best for them. In terms of the future, as I've said, there's very little engagement planned. As I said, the government expects Rutland County Council to hold public meetings and to do engagements. Obviously, I would urge them to do that, but there is no space for referendums. I have done the calculations for how much it would cost. It would cost a few tens of thousands for us to hold a referendum in Rutland and for us to have our say, so it's not free, this isn't easy, but Rutland County Council could call a referendum. They'd have to decide on what question and at what stage, and that would be for them to do. Bigger, better fallacy. As I say, there is no proof that bigger is better. There is an academic who's been studying local council reform who 10 years ago said that the search for optimum size of council has proven to be as successful as the search for the philosopher's stone. And I think that's true because we are people that show the exception to the rule. We have all sorts of challenges when it comes to our service, and I will not sit and be an apologist to Rutland County Council. If you were the MP who dealt with them, you'd have a lot of frustrations yourself. However, that is the job of local council. No local council is liked. And if I said to anybody in the room, there aren't anyone, if the people here from Leicestershire, from Lincolnshire, and I said to them, do you love your county council? They would put their hands up and they'd probably make a face and say they found them to be a nightmare as well. But the evidence does not show that bigger is better, and the reality of social care is the best example for us. We are in the top 5 in the country for our highways, and we are number 1 for adult social care, which is the biggest challenge facing every single council in this country. The District Councils Network has issued a load of FOIs to government, and the government has not commissioned any work or any assessments to back up their £500,000 figure or back up 380,000. So we don't know the evidence on which they decided these figures. There's also the cost of restructuring, rebranding, repopulating, and all that kind of jazz. And the other thing I would say is that in my experience as an MP, and I know it's only over 5 years, when I was representing Melton, trying to get Leicestershire County Council to care about what was happening in Melton and the Vale was a nightmare. And they're not far, we're about a 45-minute drive here. I fought for the Melton Road Distributor to be built after 50 years. And the amount of times they said, we're going to kill it, because that part of the county, there isn't that much development. It's so rural. We need to focus on our kind of towards Nuneaton, towards Birmingham, towards Loughborough and D2N2 corridor. Melton was constantly forgotten. And you will know, from when Rutland was part of Leicestershire, that we never got our fair share, which I'll come to in a moment. When it comes to representation, I worry about our voice, because democracy and accountability matters. As you've seen so far, we've had no voice in this process. I've had no voice in this process at all. So in a new council, I would question what would their focus be. Is it going to be protecting our rural way of life? Is it about recognising that rural areas have different needs? As I say, I've seen that magnified. Stamford, again. You mention the word Grantham or Lincoln anywhere in Stamford on the doorstep, and you get a right earful about the fact that essentially Stamford feels like it's milked for all its money and its contributions to Lincolnshire. The other example I'd make is that I do a lot of work with MPs around the world, particularly in Europe. And the amount of WhatsApps I get from them mocking me for posting about the fact that I'm fighting to protect our bin collection to be every 2 weeks and not every 3 weeks. The amount of mocking I get going, why are you knocking on doors? Why are you sat in the village hall doing 2 hours of surgeries? Around Europe, where they have much bigger systems where MPs represent 200,000 to 400,000 people, there is no local connection. The MPs are not fighting on local issues, they don't knock on doors, and they find it hilarious that I spend so much of my time doing it. They've even edited videos of me out in the hail with their various commentary and voices about what I'm doing. All the evidence shows the more you increase the population of councillors goes down, the level of engagement goes down, but also the number of councillors from major national parties goes up. Because people don't know they're independents, and they don't know they're people who are standing for smaller parties. And I know it doesn't benefit me to say that, but that is the reality that we're looking at. Again, as I said, the number of councillors, We could end up with only 3, or we could end up with 6 at best. Best luck. And obviously low representation leads us to have local issues being marginalised, policies not in our interest, and as one Leicestershire MP put it to me, Rutland would be the mouse in the rowing boat with an elephant. So in terms of the voice of councillors and MPs, I'm really concerned about this as well. The position of Rutland County Council at this time is that the future of our county is a decision for the leader only. So councillors will not get a vote. The cabinet won't even get a vote. It will rest just on one person to make that decision. Now that's also not what was told to other councils before Christmas. However, I've now had it in writing that that is the position. There is a full council meeting on the 11th, I think it is, but there's no vote. So councillors will be able to stand up and say we're happy or we're not happy, but it doesn't actually impact on decision making. And we also know that because the letter on the 10th went without any other person signing it off, or any other political party or any other view. And I feel really strongly that this should be party apolitical. I'm working really closely with the Liberal Democratic leader of Harborough because we both want to stop making sure the city doesn't expand into Harborough. This process doesn't really affect me as an MP. I will affect Rutland. I will represent Rutland as long as you're willing to re-elect me, no matter who the council is. But I think it's really important that we have the right decisions being made for our county because many people have a say. And what we've seen in other areas, for example Northamptonshire, is the leader has said, I'm going to give every councillor a vote on this because it's about the future of our entire county and not just about my decision making. Equity and fair share, as I've touched on, with less representation we won't get our fair share. We saw this last time when we were in Leicestershire. We've even seen something called the LEPs, which is local enterprise partnerships. So essentially government set these up to try and really push forward money coming in to really kind of bolster business and opportunity in industry in areas. We were in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough model. We didn't really get our fair share. So then Rutland moved to being with Leicestershire, thinking we might get our fair share, and we didn't. And then we moved to the Lincolnshire LEP, thinking we might get our fair share. The Lincolnshire LEP sent through a 30-page, very glossy document to me just after Christmas. There wasn't one mention of Rutland in their entire document, even though we paid to be a member of the Lincolnshire LEP. Because unfortunately, whenever we join these big organisations, they forget about us or they milk us. As I say, costs, we have no idea what the costs are going to be, but councils are having to cover all those costs themselves, which again is money being taken away from frontline services. So how do we mitigate some of these concerns as we go forward? Well, the first one, of course, is which model we back. It should be our say, we should be able to make a representation, should be able to say what we want. We could move for an alternative proposal. We could just say, do you know what, we're all happy to try a new model of local government, or we want to protect us in the county. We could demand a referendum. We could put in place red lines, so things like smaller council divisions. So if we're going pushed into, I really hope not a donut, because I will say very clearly that is not my preference, but if we move into 2 unitaries, we could say we want smaller divisions, so that Rutland ends up with 9 councillors, or something more representative, so that we keep democracy as close to home as possible. We would, of course, say, and I will be very clear on this, I expect our council tax to go down to match the average across Leicestershire. Because at the moment, there is no promise that if we join Leicestershire, that our council tax will go down. They don't need to do it, there's no requirement for them to do it, and I've been trying to push to get essentially assurance that could we force that to be the case, it would just have to be a red line. And that's about how you negotiate and how you play the cards that you have. We have to play them very, very strongly. So does this have to happen? Do we have a choice? There was a lot of excitement after a statement by the local government minister a few weeks ago where he said, the government is not requiring any area to reorganise. What we did was write out and invite proposals to be submitted. But when you turn to the white paper they published, as you can see, there's more in it. So the English Devolution White Paper outlines that government, as I say, will legislate for a ministerial directive to enable the government to create strategic authorities and local government reform where local leaders have not agreed to devolve powers. The government has said it will limit its use of this power, of course, to instances where all other routes have been exhausted. They've also said it will be used to conclude the process where there is majority support, but there's no way of determining what majority support means, or where the formation is essential to complete the rollout of strategic authorities. By that they mean not having orphans like us in the middle of nowhere. If we say we can't agree devolution, it gives us more power, it gives us a chance to delay, but my husband did say to me the other day that the phrase resistance is futile, which is for a Trekkie like me, definitely strong home. So as you can see, they're very clear that they will legislate to make it necessary to ensure progress. So in terms of what next, we were expecting a letter from government last week saying whether or not elections in Leicestershire and Rutland have been cancelled. That hasn't come to us. As I say, I'm now expecting we're here on Thursday, we're meant to hear today, it could happen any time this week. I hope we don't see ourselves put in pathway 2, because it means we have to have the next proposal from government by March. And I don't think that creates a space for the data collection, the analysis, the discussions that are then public engagement. So what do I want to hear from you? Essentially, your thoughts on what has been proposed for Rutland. And it's really hard, because when I started drafting this, like 3 weeks ago, I tried to be really neutral, but the more I wrote it, the more radicalised I got. So I apologise, because I know there will be some of you who feel passionate that we should be joining Leicestershire. We heard some of those views last week, and I want to hear them. But what I would love to hear from you is, if we are forced to go through with this, do you want one unitary for the whole of Leicestershire and Rutland? Do you want 2 unitaries, in which case do you already have a view on north, south, east or west? Or what are the red lines that I should be pushing for if we have these negotiations? What are your priorities? What are your concerns? And then any questions I can try and answer. But as you can see, local government reform is not my area of expertise. So I understand as much as anyone else in the room. But really, over to you, and at the very end we'll do a little straw poll, because that was suggested by somebody at the last meeting. It was actually really helpful. So any thoughts, comments, questions, over to you. Thank you so much. Sorry. Give me 1 second. We're just going to have a mic. We'll go to this gentleman and I'll come to you. Sorry. Almost there. That's fine. Also, while we're waiting, we just say a big thank you to Rob Passani, who once again has made sure that everything else can be done. I don't speak words of government, but I also don't speak mics and speakers and stuff like that. Please, over to you.
Hello, my name's Richard. I have done a little bit of finance in the MOD. You said, if I got it right, that there was a one-off cost saving for the entire project of £400 million.
Which the MOD would laugh at, because that's
which actually comes into the noise in government. You know, that's lost in the roundings at the end of the year when you're spending the billions that they are. And they haven't fronted up to the ongoing running costs. So there will be a crossover point, and it strikes me that at the highest level, this is not value for money, so why is it being pursued? Any thoughts?
I'm trying to go back because I shortcutted the money because I was worried about how long you're having to listen to my voice. But essentially, yes, so they've worked out that the reorganisation will have a one-off cost of, this is the PwC report that the government refers to, 400 million and the potential to realise a few billion over 5 years, post-implementation net recurring savings 700 million. But that's before you add in the nailed level, which we don't know how much that will cost, particularly in a rural area, what that would mean. So there are no figures at the moment, and when you put in written questions, which a lot of us MPs have, saying, can you please tell us more about the cost? They're being honest, they don't know because there isn't an assessment. So in terms of why is it being done, there's 2 things, which is, look, historically, I've spoken to quite a few of my Labour MP friends, and they're like, we just hate districts, we don't think they work, and also particularly when you represent cities, that's not really a thing. You don't have district councils, you have the city council, and it's the one council. It is really difficult having so many councils. You know, so I represent 3 counties, the only MP in the country, I have many district councils, I have many county councils, let alone now having a mayoralty potentially got in place on at least 2 mayors. So it is difficult. So if you're government, if you're told you've only got 10 mayors to deal with, that makes things a lot easier. And you can just devolve a big box of money and say, go distribute it. And the idea is sound that if money is devolved and powers are devolved, then you'd have better opportunity locally and better decisions being made than made in Parliament. However, you are stripping out the lowest level that does it. So there's essentially a perspective about the preference, which is to scrap districts, but then also the belief that genuinely it would make things faster for them, essentially getting money out of the system and how it moves. That's the arguments I've had put to me so far, but particularly on obviously things like housing, planning. And look at, you know, West Midlands, it has worked. You know, Andy Street has done an amazing job. Andy Burnham, Manchester, it has worked in those 2 models. But I would argue very strongly, and you don't know how many arguments I have with the NHS when they just put the Midlands for data. We are the East Midlands, we are fundamentally different. What we haven't seen yet is it work in rural areas, and that's not for want of trying. You know, Western, what's it called? Western England there, the Cambridge and Peterborough there. So it does work in some places. I'm just not convinced it works everywhere, and that's also the evidence of the district council network who says rural areas are the ones that will suffer most from this. But then if you look at the housing targets, the government has reduced the housing targets for Leicester City, Nottingham City, Peterborough City, and they've increased ours by 123%. I've got so many counties with different kind of numbers. I think ours is 123%, South East England's gone up, Harbour's gone up, everyone's gone up. So I think there's also a thing about rural versus city, and it's very difficult to fight for money for rural areas. You'll remember the Levelling Up money we got. We were the #1 news story on all the radio, all the BBCs that day, because people were outraged that Rutland being given money for Levelling Up. But the reason we've been given money for Levelling Up is because we've got such high rurality and some of the lowest social mobility in the country. Which means if you're born into a wealthy family in Rutland, you will have a wonderful life. But if you're born into a tougher background, your ability to lift yourself out of that is so much harder. And that was the argument we put to government. They went, oh, they're right, let's give them some money because they need some support. But the country was an uproar. How dare this rural, posh, well-off area be given money? But, yeah, so it's quite a difficult argument to make nationally as well. Please, sir, sorry. Just wait for my time. I will give you the answers.
I was just going to say, when was this in the Labour Party manifesto, the last election?
So, mayoralties was in their manifesto. They were very clear they wanted to bring mayoralties, but no, local government reorganisation is not in the manifesto, and that is a point that's being made by every political party, and even some Labour councils in some areas. Because obviously this is a really weird thing we've got at the moment. In some parts of the country, the Dems have said suspend the elections. In other parts of the country, Conservatives have said suspend the elections. In some parts of the country, Conservatives are saying, how dare you suspend elections? In some parts of the country, the Dems are saying, how dare you suspend it? And it's the same with Labour. They're a lot more quiet.